Autism is a spectrum. My autism presentation is green, red, blue. Someone else's autism presentation could be yellow, orange, purple. They're not more or less autistic than I am and vice versa.
Jeremy Davis took an online test, only to discover he wasn't writing fiction. He was writing his own story, misdiagnosed, overlooked, gaslit, fired, and nearly bedridden.
There's a lot of problematic rhetoric around autism, like, we're gonna find a cure by September. It's not how cures work. Autism is not a disease. You can't cure neurodevelopmental disorders. People say like, oh, we've seen this mass explosion of autism and ADHD diagnoses. This is just a fad. No, it's because it hasn't been that long since autism was a diagnosis to begin with.
This is the shocking journey of how one man turned his pain into power and ignited a movement online.
This is my reality. I can't poke in my brain to make it not this anymore. This is just how my brain functions. My struggles are valid. I'm not making excuses. I have real neurological things that I can't control.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin.
Hello, welcome to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Jeremy Davis. He's a disability advocate that focuses specifically on neurodiversity. We're talking things like ADD, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, autism, CPTSD. So Jeremy's going to really tell us a lot about the details and talk about ways that you can be more effective in the workplace and in your family. So Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I always like to start with kind of the personal story. What got you started on this? How did you decide that this is where you wanted your life to go?
That is a long and convoluted story that I will try to paraphrase. I actually am a filmmaker, and since seventh grade, my goal has been to be a writer and director in Hollywood. But as I graduated college and got into the workforce in film and television production, I faced a lot of ableism, and my health couldn't keep up. I couldn't do the long days. And I had a lot of like physical shutdowns and issues with disabilities that I was just learning about that I had. So in 2009, I kind of fell into social media video creation for other people. And I found success. And as a business owner making social media content for other people, I was able to manage to a point my own symptoms, my own schedules, and to provide accommodations for myself that employers wouldn't. So I did that for other people for a number of years. And then the pandemic happened. There was a major slowdown in that kind of work. I was no longer at a company that I had been working with prior to the pandemic. I took a little break and I decided that I was going to do social media content for myself and that it was just going to be for myself. I wasn't going to be trying to build an audience. I was sharing my experiences in fun storytelling ways because that's what I like. Um, and share that with people and share stories and elements that I wasn't really seeing much online. So I posted my first video and it got 15,000 views. And then my next video got like 12,000 and then my next video got 17,000 and I went, "Oh, okay. This is really resonating with people." And it grew from there. So I do disability representation consulting. So for entertainment, whether that's novels, movies, TV shows, that kind of thing. And then I do my online advocacy work through my social media channels. And I have success there. One, because this resonates with so many people. And then two, I have a background in social media, so I have a decade plus of experience of what works.
Yeah, so I got a ton of questions to ask. I want to start maybe with the beginning of your story around you said you were experiencing symptoms. And I know to tell you this, but I'll say it for the listeners, like a lot of this neurodiversity stuff, it's like a hidden disability, right? It's not like you've lost an arm or a leg or you have a disease where something is very visible. For most people, you can pass. What that also means, I think many people that, are neurodiverse don't know that they are. So it's extra confusing in that way. So can you share a little bit about what your symptoms were and what made you want to look a little bit deeper into what might be going on for you?
Um, that is also a long and convoluted. It's so interwoven and I graduated college in 2004. So a lot has changed and we've come a long way in just public awareness. A lot of that has been social media. So somebody who might be going through it now may have a very different experience. I wasn't diagnosed autistic until I was 40. The only reason that I was diagnosed autistic is because I was writing a screenplay and I wanted one of the characters to be autistic and I was doing research. And I found this website called Embrace Autism, and they have all of the different self-assessment quizzes. And the resource is really, really phenomenal. They have a blog and great information, and they actually have little blurbs on each one of the quizzes that says these are the positives of this quiz, these are the criticisms of it, etc. So I'll just throw that out for any of your listeners who might be looking for a resource. So I found those and I'm like, hey, okay, I'm going to take at least one of these quizzes as myself, just as like a baseline of like, okay, this is normal. And then I'll try to take it as the character to see how accurate of my perception of autism is. And I took the quiz as myself, and it was like, we can't diagnose you because this is just a website, but you might want to get this looked at. Like the number was well above the threshold for get assessed. And since then, they've actually done the scientific studies and everything that say if you test positive through these quizzes, the quizzes don't give false positives, they can give false negatives. So statistically speaking, you can self-diagnose through these. So I took so the first one was a positive, and I took all of them, and they were all like, yeah, and it was really eye-opening to me because I had pictured autism as like Rain Man and all of the other media representations of autism. And I'm like, I'm not that. I'm kind of quirky and eccentric. But yeah, autism is a spectrum. And what many people don't realize, they think like spectrum means severe and minor. But that's not a spectrum. A spectrum is red, yellow, blue, green, orange, pink, purple. So my autism presentation is green, red, blue. Someone else's autism presentation could be yellow, orange, purple. It's both autism. They're not more or less autistic than I am and vice versa, but that's how the spectrum works. So, the sliding scale is instead like, what are the level of accommodations do you need? And that's how it's broken down in the current DSM-5 of are you level 1, 2, and 3? Level 1 is people more like me who have fewer general accommodations, but if I'm experiencing sensory overload or feeling unsafe or anything like that, I can quickly go from level 1 to 2 to 3 where I can't function without help. So all of that was just like this mind-blowing, paradigm-shifting experience of I didn't know I was autistic. Um, and yeah, similar kind of experience with ADHD. It was several years before that, I got diagnosed, and just it hadn't occurred to me that I could be ADHD simply because of a lot of the myths surrounding what ADHD is supposed to look like. Like ADD doesn't exist anymore. It's all under the ADHD umbrella, but again, it's a spectrum. It can present this way or this way or this way, but it's all ADHD. And it's funny because when I got diagnosed, I had reconnected with a high school friend that I hadn't seen in 15 years or so. And I'm like, yeah, man, I just got diagnosed ADHD. And he's like, you didn't know? I'm like, wait, you knew? Why didn't anybody tell me? So, like, people in high school kind of picked up on differences and things like that. Maybe not everybody chose the right labels of ADHD or autistic, but it can be very much apparent to other people and not to you, or it might not be apparent to anybody, and you have these traits.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, kind of for my own thing, is like, where is the field going? Like, where's the emerging science and data around neurodiversity? Because it's a newer diagnosis, although it's been around forever. It's not like people are just now autistic and they never have been. But like you're saying, we now have like languaging and diagnostic tools and all this stuff. And it seems like it's a very rapidly changing field.
So several things are happening with that, and the history of our understanding of autism is fascinating because
Yeah.
autism was originally classified as a subtype of schizophrenia.
Mm.
And so Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger's both studied autism separately and two very different presentations of autism back in the 1940s. But it wasn't until 19, I think 80, that it was actually put into the DSM, and I think it was the DSM-3. So don't quote me on these, but I think I'm right. um, and it was uh child child schizophrenia autism. So it was linked back to the original like schizophrenia type thing. And so that kept changing and kept changing. There was a lot of change into the 90s of it became a few different diagnoses. So there was Asperger's, which was different at the time than autism. Then it was discovered that Hans Asperger helped the Nazis euthanize and identify what kids should be euthanized. And he was a Nazi sympathizer. And they're like, yeah, not going to have that diagnosis anymore.
Yeah,
And
might change the name on that one.
right. Right. This is all the same umbrella. So why do we
Yeah.
have two different diagnoses?
Mhm.
Um, and so they combined them. And then it wasn't until 2000, now I'm going to get the date wrong, but somewhere around like 2011, 2013, something like that, that you could not get ADHD and autism. You couldn't have both. And so then it was realized later that um somewhere around there's a very high comorbidity rate of having both. Very high. And so there's some hypotheses now that it may be that ADHD and autism could be under the same umbrella even there. Um, and this is kind of true for a lot of neurodiversity. There's not terrible amount of like definitive, like there's no blood test. There's no, we can scan your brain and here's the autism. Now, people who are autistic or have ADHD do have typically brain differences, but it's not like quantifiable. You can't go, oh, we've seen this in your brain. That means you have XYZ. And so, with the research that has been done up to this year, that's kind of the growing field in science is a lot of scientists asking questions and then trying to do studies to figure out if those questions are right. Like, is ADHD and autism under the same umbrella? And they may not be, or they might be. We don't know yet. But there's also a lot of co occurrence with other neurodivergencies, such as epilepsy. So there's all of these different elements, and we just don't know how it all fits together. Um, so what's really cool is that with social media, there has been a much greater widespread sharing of information between people who have the lived experiences. And so we're advocating for ourselves. We're saying, hey, this is what's going on with me. And then a bunch of other people are like, yeah, me too. And my doctor says I'm crazy and that this isn't happening. And so with that collective voice, things are gaining traction. The caveat being that there's also misinformation that gets shared the same way. So you do have to be careful, but it's that delicate balance between actual self advocacy and the scientific community needing to include the community as leaders in the research, while also not having this misinformation spread and catch fire, spread like wildfire, where like something is shared and it's like, oh yeah, I have that too. Well, that must be this. And it's like, no, we need to slow down, and yes, we can approach our doctors with that and say, hey, we should do some research on it. But yeah, having kind of that intentional, slow pace with scientific research. Unfortunately, with the current administration, a lot of funding has been cut to the research, to all health stuff. There's also a lot of problematic rhetoric around autism, like, we're going to find a cure by September. It's not how cures work. Autism is not a disease. And you can't cure neurodevelopmental disorders. It's just like, that's not how they work. So when people say like, "Oh, we've seen this mass explosion of autism and ADHD diagnoses, this is just a fad." No. It's because it hasn't been that long since autism was a diagnosis to begin with. In fact, the first person who was diagnosed as being autistic just died a few years ago. So like it's not been that long, and every few years there's this massive change in understanding where the bucket, where it was a subset of schizophrenia, is now much bigger. And so a lot of people are going, "Oh, I fall into that bucket. I'm learning about myself. Oh, I need these accommodations and I'm valid for being this way. I'm not just some wacky eccentric uncle."
Absolutely, yeah. Like I said, I mean, people are starting to identify with it more. I mean, there is a lot of information out there, good and bad. I mean, one of the reasons we found you is I love how you combine like real scientific rigor with funny TikTok videos. I think you have a really great way of making that stuff really approachable for people. Because I do think it is overused, right? I mean, similar to a lot of mental health diagnoses, like narcissism and borderline personality disorder are being tossed out all over the place online without any kind of like, psychiatric or, or psychological consultation. So it's important to have good voices like yourself that can parse through that noise. And of course, listeners, all of his links will be in the show notes if you want to take a look at his content. So I guess the question I have for you is like, what do you do about it? I guess, right? So, like, say you got the diagnosis, right? Whether you had it as a child or we talked a little before the show, there's many people like yourself, right, that are getting it in their 40s when they have kids and they realize, oh, yeah, my kid got diagnosed, in grade school and, it's genetic. So I probably have some version of this as well. Like, what do you do about it? What types of changes are helpful in your life to make life more palatable or to adapt your environment to make those accommodations?
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show.
To answer the first part, like, getting the diagnosis is in and of itself a huge hurdle. And for a lot of people, it's not accessible. Like, if you're not a white male, you're far less likely to have the ability to even get in to be diagnosed, and you're far less likely to get diagnosed even if you are autistic or ADHD, just because of the stigmas and the marginalization within. Because, like, I forget the year, but women couldn't be diagnosed as autistic until pretty recently. It was thought
Really?
to be
Like, it just
just
said that in
men.
the diagnosis, like, it's
Yes.
just men, women they don't have this? That's
It's
crazy.
it's just men, doesn't affect women. It's
Right, that's
a
so
male
crazy.
condition. And then they
Yeah.
find that autism presents differently in women, but it's still autism, because, oftentimes women will present as more social. Women will be interested in social, interactions and that kind of thing. So that for a long time had been, "Oh, if you can participate socially, that means you're not autistic." And that still happens today. There are so many stories I get from community members saying, "Yeah, in my assessment, I made eye contact with the person assessing me, whether it's a doctor, nurse practitioner, whoever the medical team was, and so they said, 'Oh, you can't have autism.'" And that's not how the DSM outlines it. The DSM, for the one where it cites eye contact, it says that the person will have differences in behavioral mannerisms or social interactions, but it just says differences, and then it gives a few different examples. One of the examples, it says it could be lack of eye contact, or it could be different kind of mannerisms, like gesticulations or whatnot. Um, so I hear all of these people where the doctors who may have gone to school 10 years ago, 15 years ago, are still operating from what they learned back then and aren't paying attention to what the actual DSM says, that you can be social like me. And oftentimes autistic people will study in their areas of quote deficit. So um, I have a background in interpersonal communication studies. So I have a deficit, quote unquote. I'm using the medical terms deficit, though it's not in the neurodiversity affirming paradigm that I like to do, but just for shorthand. So that because I'm struggling with communication, I study communication until I have an expertise in communication so that I'm not marginalized as much. I'm still marginalized by my communication, so that I seem more natural. Um, so just getting those diagnoses is very hard. It can take 2 years um through the diagnosis process for people to get either of those, autism or ADHD. And a lot of times people are actually denied when they have it and they go and see a second opinion and they're like, yes, you have this. Eye contact doesn't rule you out. Or like your ability to hyperfocus is actually a trait of ADHD. So I am a advocate for self-diagnosis. If you're doing the research and taking those uh, evaluations that are accredited, specifically when you can't get uh, a diagnosis, when the process is inaccessible, and especially with the rhetoric with RFK talking about an autism registry and things like that. A lot of people are saying, I'm not even going to try to get diagnosed because I don't want to risk being on a list somewhere. So that's like the first big hurdle. Then when you get diagnosed, oftentimes you're accused of, well, and even before getting diagnosed, you're accused of not having it. People in my comments hop in and be like, "You're not autistic," all the time. Um, and it happens with ADHD as well. So it's a really frustrating and traumatizing, invalidating process. But then once you have it, there is this internal shift. where you're able to address the internalized ableism, which is really kind of the first step of, okay, this is my reality. I can't poke in my brain to make it not this anymore. This is just how my brain functions, and it's okay. It's valid. I'm valid. My struggles are valid. I'm not lazy. I'm not making excuses. I have real neurological things that I can't control. And then there's that long process of figuring out, all right, how do I hack my life to be able to give myself accommodations? And that's really what it is, giving accommodations. It's not like forcing yourself, because usually what the thing that we've all been trying to do is to push through and force ourselves to get through our struggles, and that flares the nervous system response up. It makes the fight or flight or freeze and fawn response worse, and then that causes us to go into burnout, where eventually we can't function. For myself, long before I was diagnosed, now I have other physical disabilities as well, but I was pushing myself so hard for so long, my body shut down. I was bedridden for 3 years. I had a medical professional estimate that I might only have 15 years left to live because of the rapid decline in my health, and it was bad. So I don't recommend pushing through. Tried it, don't do it. And I'm a very physical, active, generally happy guy that's like, yeah, let's go. I've still struggle with depression and anxiety and all of those kinds of things, but you can't stop me till my body stopped me. um and that was a big element of my journey, is just like being gaslit while I'm like laying in bed in excruciating pain and like spasming, and it's like, oh, you're just like, try harder. So once you get through that part and have that, like, I accept myself for where I am. Okay, what can I do today? The big next step was like learning to listen to my body. A common trait for autism is alexithymia, where you have trouble with interoception. Your body and your brain, you don't know that like things are going on. You don't even necessarily recognize the emotions that you're experiencing. And so that can be a struggle for a lot of people. My alexithymia is minimal. I've done a lot of training of myself, not knowing that I was training that, to be able to recognize and pay attention. But I also, through that period leading up to and during being bedridden, I was actively training myself to ignore my disabilities so that I could function and like bring money in, or, you know, be a dad, be a husband, be a friend, have life experiences. And so I had to retrain that and go, okay, I know I really want to keep working on this thing, but I need to stop. That's a really big one. And then there's all kinds of little life hacks that I've had to be creative. So, so we have a window unit air conditioner in our bathroom that kind of helps cool the upstairs. I can't have it in my room because it's too loud and it keeps me awake. So it's got to be in the bathroom. But when I'm using the bathroom, it's blowing on me and it's too cold. So I turn it off. And then I use the bathroom and then I forget to turn it back on. And then a couple hours later, it's really hot in the upstairs and then it can't keep up and we're all miserable that night. So it's things like I get myself into a routine of You could do something like you put something on the toilet seat that you have to move before using the toilet. And then I put it um, in the doorway so that when I'm leaving, I'm going to step on it. So it's like creating traps for myself. And so after I use the bathroom, I'm like, oh, that thing, pick it up, put it on the toilet seat, turn the air conditioner on. It's my visual cue. Turn it on. So there's things like that. And then you can help if you have kids that are struggling with this. Those are things that you can help them develop. So in doing that, you're saying, hey, you're valid. I'm teaching you skills for how to when you experience something at school or wherever, when later on when you're grown up and on your own, they've got the skill of like, oh, this thing keeps I keep having this behavior and I gotta figure out some sort of hack that works with my brain so that I can provide myself the accommodations I need. It's those kinds of things. For myself in my writing, uh, the common phrase for like how do you become a professional writer? Well, you got to write every day. That doesn't work for me because my disabilities won't allow it, and I'll get into burnout really quick. And so I have to take every day at a time. And it took me a long time deprogramming the advice that's rampant throughout every industry, but especially the entertainment industry, that's very ableist and is not catered towards the way humans work, much less the way disabled people need accommodations. So a lot of it is mental, of like getting over the shame that you've been taught and going, I'm allowed to do it my own way, and then having to put in the work of like experimenting to find out what works. Because if you don't write every day, then you don't have the routine, then you don't. So, how do you stay consistent while also allowing for your body uh, to do what it needs to do? So, one of the things that I do is I'll sit down to the writing session, and if it ain't working within 20 minutes, I know I'm not going to push it. I'm like, okay, I showed up. Or I'll go, it's not today. I'm not feeling up to it today, but I'll have it back in the back of my mind. Think of some ideas, do a little brainstorm, meditate on it a little bit. Okay, I wrote today because I thought about it. And so I keep the routine in a mental container of like, yes, this counts. This counts. So that I'm like, oh yeah, I did it yesterday. So now I can do it today and I don't fall out of the habit.
Yeah, I love that framework, right? And we talk a lot on the show about taking responsibility for your life, and that's what I'm saying. It's like you are responsible for the diagnosis and making accommodations in your own life. You know, figuring out your own user manual and then building your life around that. Versus what I think a lot of men, especially Western men, are conditioned to do, which you're talking about, just power through. You know, just more force, more effort, and when we talk about guys with mental illness too that have depression or OCD or bipolar, it's the same kind of messaging where it's like, oh, you're weak, you're a coward, you're lazy. You get all these horrible labels thrown on you versus like you actually can leverage this stuff to be a superpower in some ways. You just have to do the work to leverage it. It's a different type of work. You know, we're not saying don't work on it. It's just work on it from a more environmental aspect rather than just like this kind of brute force, more power whenever you come up against an obstacle.
Yeah. I typically shy away from the superpower type thing because oftentimes the way it's used is in the general public, it's like dismissing all the struggles. It's like every superpower has such a huge struggle behind it that it negates it being a superpower at all. Um, but it like you can compensate to a point, and none of my superpowers have been anything that, like, negates the disability or is greater than it's just like, "Oh, so I'm like, if this is the average, I can get here." Now, I can develop skills in terms of writing that are advanced, but it wasn't the struggles of the disability. Like, if I didn't have the disability, I could still do that. You know, I have a unique perspective. I can use certain things to my advantage, but it's still a disability. And in my disability pride, I actually have a video that is this particular subject coming out soon. That is my disability pride, with July being Disability Pride Month, has to encompass all of it. It has to encompass the struggles, the failures, the not being able to go out with friends because I'm laid up, not being able to go to film festivals because it's not accessible, all of those kinds of things. So, with my own life, I I'm very privileged because things have happened for me in weird ways where I've been able to create a space for myself. I am able to have my own business, and it has a lot of its own struggles. And sometimes, yeah, I don't have the structure and the support that a supportive, as rare as they are, job could give me. And so I have built my own accommodations, and not all disabled people can do that. In fact, a very small percentage of disabled people have those opportunities. So when we then look into the workforce, I have been fired from almost every job I've ever had because of ableism. Um, and so on the one hand, yeah, as a disabled person, I have to do what I can to take responsibility for what I can. There are some people who need someone to help them function during the day, to even go to the bathroom or get out of the bed. Um, and so I don't want to focus too much on the burden shouldn't be on the individual. It should be a communal responsibility where, yes, I have some responsibility within the community, but at the same time, when I'm in a work environment and the work environment is not providing accommodations, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility ends with saying, these are the accommodations I need. For one example, and it's a ridiculous example. The last job I had, um, they had soap in the bathroom that I couldn't use because it would react with my hands, and it would, yeah. My hands would dry out, I could get rashes, it just, yeah. So I'm like, "Hey, here's some other brands that I can use. Can we provide those in the bathroom?"
Swap it out. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That should be simple.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be a big corporate thing, right?
You would think.
You would
You would
think.
think, but I think I know where the story's going.
Well, our corporate policy is that the soap has to be antimicrobial on the label for employee health. And I'm like, yeah, but the chemical additives that make it antimicrobial are what I react to. Here's a study that shows that antimicrobial soap actually isn't any more effective than regular soap and actually is more harmful to your health because of the chemicals in it. So please provide an alternate soap. I'm sorry. Corporate policy says, and it's completely illegal, but am I going to hire a lawyer to take them to court over a $5 bottle of soap? So what ended up happening is I had to bring my own soap into the bathroom. It's absolutely ridiculous. And so if you think something as tiny and small and minor as that, at a relatively small corporation, you know, this isn't like a big corporate conglomerate mega company that has all these layers of red tape. Um, and I still couldn't get like, "Oh, yeah, we'll give you soap in it." Just think about all of the other possibilities of the struggles that both I and so many disabled people face in the workplace, and then we get fired over them. And that was my experience, with this last company, is they laid me off, using the pandemic for an excuse. and they had been trying to get rid of me for a while, but every time they tried to fire me, it was because of ableist practices. And I'm like, hey, do you want to move forward with this? And so it's just like exhausting just going to work, where work is exhausting for everybody. Multiply that by 10 if you have a disability.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online. I think it's true. I mean, I work with a number of neurodiverse clients, and they get told like they're difficult, right? Or they're complaining, or they're too sensitive, right? You get these labels on you where you're saying like, look, man, my hands are literally breaking out in a rash. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not making this up. You can look at my hands and. Well, so I guess like I just thread on that a little bit more around workplace accommodations. What maybe I'm sure there's not a big answer, but what are some general things that you think workplaces should institute or should be aware of? And many of my listeners, just to anchor the conversation, are actually small business owners. So a lot of them are probably just naive to this, right? Because they're new time business owners. Their teams are 25, maybe 50 people at the most. So they're not as aware. So for someone like that is, inspired by the conversation, who wants to make accommodations, but doesn't really know where to start or even how to ask, what do you recommend for them?
Yeah, such good points, because like even when I talk with much, much larger companies, $100 million companies to some of the biggest companies on the planet, a lot of the employees who are implementing policy and workplace environments are completely unaware that the Americans with Disabilities Act exists or what's in it. Um, and part of the challenge for us as disabled people getting accommodations is there isn't like a hey, do this, because someone in a wheelchair needs very different accommodations than someone who's deaf. Maybe it's a deaf person in a wheelchair, or, like there's so many different disabilities. There's thousands upon thousands of disabilities, and the accommodations are different. And three different wheelchair users may need three different accommodations depending on their specific needs. There's some general ones of like a wheelchair has to be able to get into the building. A wheelchair has to be able to go through to their, those kinds of things. But some of the more specific things, you can't go like, here's a broad sweeping, here's what we do. So what there needs to be is number one, awareness. The Americans with Act was passed in the 90s after disabled people took over the Capitol and did a protest and made it happen. The Capitol crawl. A lot of people don't even know that that happened. And so the Americans with Disabilities Act protects people with disabilities on a national level in multiple different ways against discrimination. So it's providing accommodations that are reasonable, and I'm not a lawyer, but it has some like, here's general guidelines on what is reasonable and what it's not. If it's going to cost like $200,000, then it may be considered not a reasonable thing for, someone with 50 employees. So there's a sliding scale and some elements of that too that all factor in. But generally, you want to have to build a culture of, I am going to give my employees what they need to excel, whether or not they're disabled. Like, it's basic leadership stuff. Before I studied all the disability stuff and even knew that I was disabled, I have a background in leadership and leadership training. And it's like, oh, all of this is the same thing. It's just this person has a disability that means they have this specific accommodation that somebody without a disability wouldn't have, but you're still just giving them tools to make them successful. And we have such this productivity hustle culture that sometimes those things seem like laziness, um, when the science behind it is not. It's like, oh, if you give people breaks, they tend to be more productive. If you make them happy in the workplace, they tend to be more productive. If so like with autism, there may be breakdowns in communication because you're assuming they're meaning one thing and they're not. So oftentimes autistic people are direct, blunt. I tend to be. Um, they we can sometimes have issues really acknowledging authority for authority's sake. Like, I don't care that you're my supervisor, you're telling me to do something that's stupid. Um, and I would use different language than stupid, but it's like harmful. So can we, um, and so as a supervisor, you may get pushback that seems rude or disrespectful to your authority simply because an autistic person is just saying, "Hey, this is a harmful policy, we should address it." So being aware of those kinds of things and really like learning about your employees. You will have employees that have disabilities who are not going to disclose that to you, even if you have worked so hard to create a safe environment where people do feel safe to disclose, just because we have had so many experiences at places that were not safe and often told they were safe. And we've experienced so much trauma that I know so many disabled people who are just like, nope, I'm not telling anybody ever again. Not in a relationship where there's hierarchy of somebody above me. Not going to do it. Again, I'm privileged because I've made it my work. So I'm like, hey, I'm a consultant in this. You have to provide me accommodations or I'm not going to work with you. You know, but 99.999% of disabled people do not have that authority. And for 99.9% of my career, I did not. And when I would bring things forward, it was not met with, we're going to do everything we can to make things work for you. And, maybe the employer has a different idea of how an accommodation can be made that would still accommodate me. Maybe what I'm requesting would cause something with the employers that it's not going to work out well for them. And so there needs to be a mutual respect conversation to say, hey, let's work together. But then at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, the disabled person is the expert and accommodations have to be made in the workplace under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So yeah, first is building that culture. Second is like educating yourself on what the ADA says. You could probably find some resources online that outline a general, like, here's what to know in the ADA. I know an organization called Disability Belongs has a lot of resources, so they may have one. I'm not thinking of one specifically, but they could be someone to look into. And then from there, trusting your employees that when they bring you something that is a request, even if it's not framed in a, hey, this is an official request for accommodations, that you should do everything in your power to make that work because it may be someone who is not disclosing that they have a disability and they may not be able or feel comfortable disclosing. So if someone says like, "Hey, can we get a different type of soap in the bathroom?" and that's all they say, go like, "Yeah, we can do that. Hey, can I get a different office?" That might be accommodation, and there can be accommodations that sound really weird. The other thing to be aware of is that the person with the disability does not have to disclose what their disability is. If there is question, really, your approach should be, okay, I believe you. You need this. We're going to work towards it. If in a strange scenario where you absolutely have to have a doctor's note, all the doctor's note has to say is this person has a condition that this uh, accommodation would be helpful for. And oftentimes doctor's notes are presented written in a very gentle and non-legal way because they don't want to get involved legally. So they'll kind of present it sometimes as an option, as like, "Oh yeah, it could help this person." When in reality, still under the ADA, it can be a legal requirement, and or at the very least, it could result in a lawsuit, and nobody wants that. Um, so if you have an HR department, I have talked to so many HR departments who have no clue that the ADA exists, which is
That's
just
crazy. That's wild.
mind blowing.
Yeah, that's mind blowing. HR should know about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the last place that I worked, I was speaking directly with HR of the parent company. And I'm like, under the ADA, you can't. And he's like, what? What's, huh? No clue that they had legal responsibility. Um, so all of those kinds of things will help get you a groundwork, and yeah, definitely make sure your HR department knows and your supervisors know, and that you build a culture of accepting and creating accommodations for your workers.
Yeah, that's very helpful. That's really, really helpful tips, I think. Kind of the last topic I'd like to chat about is, you know, being a parent, you know? I think being a parent of a kid that may be neurodiverse, and I know you don't know, you'll be able to tell us, right? I'm sure there's a certain age where it starts to manifest a little bit more. But as a parent, what should you look for to get your kid evaluated, and to make sure that they get those accommodations and that you can set up your household in a supportive way for them? Because again, I think there's a lot of parents are naive to this too, because it is an emerging science.
So one thing that's interesting with it is so many of these have some statistical analysis showing that it's probably genetic. It may not always be, but um, there's oftentimes parallels. And so parents can oftentimes miss that their kids are neurodivergent because, well, that's how I was as a kid, you know? Um, so with the sharing of the stuff on social media and more awareness, that we're seeing a greater and greater acknowledgement of it and greater understanding, but there's still some of that that's missed. But if as a parent you're looking at similar to the workplace, I'm going to give my child everything they need to have success. That's the place to start. Now, caveat here, because oftentimes parents have that similar attitude of the bosses in the workforce of like, try harder. Because that's how we were brought up, right? Try harder. Instead of, oh, if I make this minor adjustment, they can succeed much easier. Um, and as a parent, I've found myself going, is this an area where I need to teach my child skills where they can overcome something? But that's not disability that they can you're not overcoming a disability. If you're ever finding yourself overcoming a disability, you know you're on the wrong track. Or is this a I need to provide accommodation? So in a situation where someone has learned helplessness. Okay, let's teach them skills to feel confident. You don't want to provide them an accommodation for learned helplessness. And I would also caveat, be careful looking for learned helplessness because they can be easily misinterpreted. Um, but sometimes what can happen is when a child is in the classroom undiagnosed or whatever, a teacher may not know how to give accommodations. And so they're just kind of like, well, that kid's not very good at this. Um, and so a child can go like, well, I can't move forward, so yeah. And there's some pretty amazing stories of kids who um say have dyslexia and we're at like a kindergarten reading level in fourth grade. And they had this like learned helplessness, and their teachers are like, well, they can't read and we can't get them to read and whatever. And then they get plugged into speech therapy, which speech also does reading. They just call it speech and reading therapy. um, and they get tools to learn to read with dyslexia. So when you have tools like Orton Gillingham, and you have a speech and language therapist work with the kid to like help them have tools with dyslexia. The dyslexia doesn't go away, but um there's a story of a kid that I know who was kindergarten in fourth grade, and within the space of 6 months of having this speech therapy, went from kindergarten reading level to a sixth grade gifted reading level. Still dyslexic, still struggles with certain elements, but had the tools and the therapies that they needed to have success. Um, so like if you're seeing things like that in your children, um, see if they're struggling in school, try to get them the accommodations that they need. Sometimes it means that you have to get a diagnosis first and they get referred to, like if it's dyslexia, a speech and language person, or whatever the case may be. Um, but also in terms of ADHD, hyperactivity, or hyperfocus, or those kinds of things, one of the biggest things is having the mental paradigm shift from my kid is misbehaving to my kid has some needs. Maybe they're having sensory needs. Maybe they're bored and they have more engagement needs. And there's so many really, really good therapists who are accredited and everything, who have social media channels, who talk about how to engage kids like that provides resources for neurodivergent kids, neurodivergent parents, or parents of neurodivergent kids, even if the parents aren't neurodivergent, that have that gentle parenting, not permissive parenting, which is often misunderstood for gentle parenting, but like gentle parenting still has, you know, discipline and um, boundaries, those kinds of things. But gentle parenting, where you're like, I'm giving my kid the resources they need for success instead of going, you're bad, go sit in the corner, which makes, especially with neurodivergent kids, the behaviors and the traits worse because they're going more into burnout as their nervous system is not regulated. So identifying what those needs are, trying to find resources, finding those resources on social media or wherever they may be to educate yourself and to get knowledge. I follow a whole bunch of them, and I'm constantly learning myself with my own kids of like, oh man, I'm doing that thing that's making things worse. Okay. And then I practice, and then I'm like, I'll keep watching more videos to like deeper and ingrain it into my own responses because sometimes in neurodiverse families, each neurodivergent person may have different and conflicting accommodation needs. So, if my kids are needing to vocally stim and my sensory issues are being activated, I'm getting kicked up into fight or flight, which then I'm like, ah, stop being so loud. Can you stop making that noise over and over and over again? And that then makes them need to vocally stem more because they're getting, and so it's like breaking that cycle, realizing it's happening first, and then going, okay, therefore they need to vocally stem. What can I do? Can I close my door? Can I put on noise canceling earbuds? Can I then put on noise canceling headphones over the earbuds? Not an exaggeration.
Nope.
Um,
Multiple layers of protection.
right. Can I encourage them to go into the playroom in the basement instead of being so close? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes, and then like, whose needs trump who's in this moment? If I'm ready to boil, if I'm like, oh, having that fight or flight trauma response, then before I hit there, I can go, guys, I'm sorry. I know you're vocally stimming and gently presenting my need of like, hey, I'm really overloaded right now. I don't want to like get into that space. Can we lower the volume or can we like set a timer? I got a timer for myself on my own desk. They have these visual timers. And certain ones are really great because like certain ones will beep a couple of times and then turn off. That can be good in certain circumstances. Other ones like this one will beep and keep beeping for like several minutes. So if it's the end of device time, I know that they've heard the timer go off. you know? And so, like, having some additional sensory cues can be helpful for them. And you can do things like, okay, we will set it 1 minute short. So if it's 20-minute device time, we'll set it for 19 minutes. All right, that's the 1 minute warning. Set it for another minute so they have time to transition because transitions are hard. But this is for me in my own work on my desk. Like, so it's like you have to be creative and experiment, see some things that can work. I don't know if you can hear right now or if the recording is like suppressing it, but my kids are like talking to the movie in the background, fire and no, and of course I've asked them, hey, I'm on a podcast and I need you to like but they can't remember. So it's just like, okay, I know, breathe, let it go. So much of it is working on yourself to like lower your stress level, process through things, kind of walk yourself through, okay, they need to stem, or like, how can I present this in a gentle way where they're going to listen to me? And doing all of that work on yourself then just lowers the stress and like vibe of the house to more regulated, and it's a compounding effect, and then you're on a lower baseline where you can like then work on your communications with them to make them more gentle, less shaming, more encouraging, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for being on the show. I've loved this conversation. I feel like there's like a wealth of knowledge, information, experience that you have that I'm just scratching the surface on. So I'd love to have you back on in the future. I think a whole episode could be done on the parenting piece. I think that is so critical, and such a big topic right now. So we'll definitely be in touch and have you back on. But in the meantime, if people want to learn more about you, follow you, get in touch with what you do, where can they find you online?
I am on most of the major social medias, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and it's generally all the same content put on all of them, except for like stories on Instagram and Facebook have some things that aren't on the other ones. Um, And then I also have a website that will link you to all of those different ones if you want to find a singular hub to look me up. It's www.jeremyandrewdavis.com, all one word. And my social media handle on all of them is just Jeremy Andrew Davis, except for, I think, YouTube, which is the Jeremy Andrew Davis. So if you search those, you should be able to find me.
Great. Yeah. If you search his name and all this stuff, it'll come up. We'll also have all those links in the show notes. So if you look in the description of the podcast, you'll be able to link to all of Jeremy's stuff. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Men's Therapy Podcast is part of Men's Therapy Online. So all of our stuff is at menstherapy.online. We're available for individual, couples, group, retreats, all that kind of stuff. We're trying to be the hub for men's mental health. So go check us out for tons of free content around topics just like this. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.